It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. This show is brought to you by Audible.com. You go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. You go there, you sign up for free, and get yourself a free audiobook. Can't beat that, right? Free book anytime you want it. Okay, and I got like a 1.5 million books on Audible.com. I got an email from them this week about what a great company they are. Okay, so tonight we are live on TalkStream Live. We are on PSN Radio, Wolf Spirit Radio, Talk Superstation, Awake Radio US, Awake Radio UK, Awake Radio Australia, 1800 Online, ShazazRadio.com, Just Us Radio, and Scottish Sovereigns on the Land. Then we also replay throughout the week. Saturday morning, tomorrow morning, we'll be back on Talk Superstation. We'll be on Para X Radio tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. with some new content over there. We'll be on Penny Entertainment Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Throughout the week, we're on Firehorse Radio Wednesday nights. Tuesday afternoons at 4 o'clock, we're on Late Night in the Midlands. Wonderful little stations run by Mike Vara. We're also carried on High Point Radio in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, both on AM and FM. Monday through Friday, around 10 o'clock in the morning, Pacific Time, we're on FPRNradio.com. They play the same podcast every day throughout the week. And I sent them the brand new show. I sent them the show. I sent them tonight. So they play it every single day of the week, all 5 days for us. Then we're on Cave Radio Broadcasting twice a week. It's a big, giant station in Philadelphia. Coming up next week, we have a really big show. We have 2 guests coming on. It's going to be one guest in the first hour, another guest in the second hour. The first hour, we're going to be about how the CIA is training Middle Eastern extremists, and then they're giving them U.S. visas to come into the United States. And they're trying to figure out, why that's going on. In the second hour, we have a guy who wrote a book about Barack Obama and his CIA background and how, comes from a CIA family, as a CIA creation. And basically that's why his paperwork is no good, because he's CIA. But when the right wing taunts him on it and says, "Oh, you got no paperwork," what's he going to say? Of course I got no paperwork. I work for the CIA. Okay, you can't say that, right? So now you got your explanation there about the Birthergate and the birth certificates and stuff like that, because the guy is working for them. This month we have coming up a show about the murder of Marilyn Monroe. And then we have a really big show I'm looking forward to is the FBI agent, I believe his name is Lambert, who was in charge of the anthrax investigation that went on after September 11, 2001. Remember how when the World Trade Center bombing happened, all that stuff? That same week, all these senators and congressmen and newspaper reporters started getting anthrax in the mail. And they actually they put the whole Congress on this drug called Cipro, because supposedly Cipro is going to protect you from anthrax. If you took the Cipro pill, you wouldn't catch the anthrax, right? And if you look on the bottle of Cipro, one of the side effects of Cipro is confusion. Okay? So you got to think, man, like, how brilliant was that, to put the whole government and the media on medication that same week that causes confusion. You might say that was a plan, right? But who knows? Now, tonight, we were supposed to do a show tonight about the Oklahoma City bombings. But unfortunately, my guest, Mrs. Dr. Painting, who wrote a book about the Oklahoma City bombing, she was supposed to come on, but she had a death in the family she had to cancel. To fill in for her, we had this other guy who was at Kent State, and he was shot at down at Kent State, and he rode in the ambulance with one of the victims that died down there, and at the last second, he had to cancel as well. So I've been working on a report that I was going to do for you on Al Sharpton, Reverend Al Sharpton, and I was going to put that in the members section. But I said, you know what? I've been working on this. Let me just do it live Friday night. It'll get a big audience. I think it's important information. In the second half of our show, we're going to have Ted Rubenstein, a really fascinating guy. This guy lived with Dave Emery. He worked with Dave Emery on his show. We worked with Mae Brussel on her show. He worked with Larry Flint at Rebel Magazine. And really, we'll be getting to it. So these guys are a conspiracy theorist, and a researcher from way back. A long time. Research JFK, all that kind of stuff. So we'll have a conversation with him. We were going to talk about the Oklahoma City bombing, but I guess we can cover that. My plan with him was to get into everything anyway, because he's one of these guys who can talk about just about anything. So what I'll do is, hopefully my voice will hold out, and I'll give you some information about Al Sharpton. Yesterday, I did an interview with Neil Sanders on mind control. And we recorded that, and that's for the members section on OppermanReport.com. Now, it's not up in the members section yet. You can find it on YouTube, and you can watch it on YouTube for $2, or you can subscribe to the Opperman Report members section, and it'll be up there in the next few days. Okay, we're having a little problems. I don't even have the password to get stuff up there, and my webmaster that's been working on that for me for free has been ill the past week. And I'd like to ask everybody to pray for him, too. He's a great guy. Christoph Scott Moses, a wonderful guy. He's an artist, a brilliant kid, but he's got these migraine headaches, that he gets. And they incapacitate him. And just such a wonderful, loving guy, man. We love him here. So I would just ask everybody to pray for him, please, and keep him in your prayers. Christoph, we love you, man. I can't wait to hear from you again soon. So now, Al Sharpton, okay? I know we have a lot of people listening from the UK and Ireland and all over the other side of the pond who may not realize who Al Sharpton is. And a lot of people here in the United States have a view of Al Sharpton. And I'd like to ask everybody to keep an open mind tonight about what you're going to hear. And I think a lot of the reaction to Al Sharpton people have right away is racism. It's a racist reaction to him. And they say, oh, he's a race baiter. Oh, he's a charlatan, and he's doing this for money, and he's whipping up the crowds, and he goes down there to Ferguson and gets involved in these things just to whip up the crowds and cause trouble, And I think we're going to find out that there's a little bit more to this story than you realize. For people out of the country, Al Sharpton, today he's a TV and a radio personality, okay? And he portrays himself as a liberal, as a civil rights activist, as a leader, and he gets involved in incidents where the police shoot or kill unarmed black men, like in Ferguson and this Freddie Gray case, where this in Baltimore, where this young black man was murdered by the police. And if there's a pattern that I've picked up with Al Sharpton, is that he's lately, at least, he's always advocating for the federal government to come in and take over these investigations, or the federal Justice Department to come in into local situations and take over the investigations and take over the prosecutions. And that's something that's making me very uncomfortable. And I think I can present to you tonight where I think that's coming from. Now, who is Al Sharpton? Where did he come from? Okay, back in 1969, the Reverend Al Sharpton was appointed by Jesse Jackson. Most people know who Jesse Jackson is. And he was appointed by Jesse Jackson to serve as the youth director of the New York City branch of Operation Breadbasket. This was an Operation Push program that was run by the Rainbow Coalition by Jesse Jackson. And then around 1971, he founded the National Youth Movement. Okay, this is what Sharpton did. He started his own little organization there called the National Youth Movement. Now it's called the National Alliance Network, NAN, I know it's called now. But the first one was called the National Youth Movement. I think that came out of Brownsville, Brooklyn. And the NAN right now is on 125th Street in Manhattan, in Harlem. In 1972, he became the youth director for Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm was a African-American congresswoman who ran for president a couple of times back in the early 70s and 80s. And Al Sharpton was appointed by her, to be the youth director of her presidential campaign. So early on, he had some very legitimate credentials. Now, he's also a reverend. And a lot of people say, well, what kind of reverend is he, man? Oh, yeah, we only hear him out there protesting and rabble-rousing and stirring up these crowds of protesters, and he's agitating the crowds. That's what he's doing. He's just down there causing trouble. He's going to come in, and cause trouble. He's no reverend. Well, the fact is that Reverend Sharpton was an ordained Pentecostal minister in New York City, and he actually gave. He was ordained like at 10 years old, and he would give sermons at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. He had that gift. And then later on in the 80s, he left the Pentecostal church and he became a Baptist, and the Bethany Baptist Church in 1994. And that's the church he works out of now. He's as a Baptist minister. Okay, and he's legally ordained, and he can preach. I've heard him preach, and we're going to get into my personal interactions with Reverend Al Sharpton, and even in personal conversations, he does base his. He will sprinkle little scriptures in there and bring up stories. I can remember an incident where we were at a meeting and he brought up the story of Job, and he started talking about Job, and it's way before I was ever into the Bible or anything like that. So he does have his legitimate Christian credentials as a reverend. He may not talk about it on the radio. He may not talk about it on TV, or when he's protesting out in front of some kid who got killed. But I've heard him. My connection to Al Sharpton, I was first exposed to Reverend Al. I guess around 78 or 79. I was a young man. I was still in high school. And this was around when I was involved in Rock Against Racism, which was a group, it was marches and smoke-ins that we put in, that were put on by the New York City Yippies. They were put on in May 1st of May Day, and then later on in October around Halloween. I guess it was 1983. In New York City, there was the death of Michael Stewart, and it really shook the whole city because Michael Stewart was a young kid, and he was a graffiti artist, and he was on the subway tracks, and he was painting some stuff on the subway walls there. And New York City Housing Transit Authority police grabbed him, and I believe they choked him to death. But they murdered Michael Stewart. He was an unarmed man, and this was 1983, and that was my second phase of contact with Al Sharpton when we were organizing and marching in the streets and protesting the death of Michael Stewart. Now, in those days, the focus of the marches were, we're going to shut this city down, and we want this man prosecuted. We want these police arrested. We want them prosecuted, and we're going to shut this city down until we get it. Then there was another big case that was just heartbreaking in New York City around that time. These were devastating cases, man. It shook because we didn't have them. Like now, you got them every week. Cops are killing people. Back in those days, it was fairly rare to have these kind of cases. And it was Eleanor Bumpers. This woman was like 70 years old, 75, 80 years old. And she lived in the housing projects. And something happened where there was some kind of a incident in her housing project's apartment. And the police showed up. And like 6 cops were in there. And they had shields and they had everything, And they shot her and they killed her. I think she had a little knife or something and, was threatening to kill herself. And again, we all the groups, by that time I was more across the board with all different groups, Black Vets for Social Justice and all different kinds of leftist, progressive type groups that knew me. And I would, you'd have a telephone tree and they'd call you up and you'd go out and you'd protest these kinds of things and you'd try to get justice. But Michael Stewart and Eleanor Bumpers were really a turning point in my life. As a matter of fact, Michael Stewart's stepdad, Moses Stewart, went to work for Al Sharpton and was his second in command for years and years, all throughout this time. Moses Stewart, I don't know what he's doing now, but he was heartbreaking to see him, and then to see him again during the Eleanor Bumpers stuff. He was there. It was at every meeting, every protest, every activist. He was everywhere. Moses Stewart. So those were the biggest incidents, but whenever there were cases of police brutality or some kind of social injustice, I was one of the guys who would be protesting out there, and we'd always run into Al Sharpton. He was a regular fixture out there as well. And again, it wasn't like he's the big Al Sharpton you see on TV, like everybody knew his name. He was pretty much just a regular guy who ran one of these little groups. This little what was it called? The National Youth Movement. There's a million groups like that, And he was just another little reverend, who ran one of these groups, like Reverend Herbert Daughtry or Roy Innes, or all these guys who we were all out there just doing this stuff, business as usual. I came into contact with him again years later. When I was working out of an office. I was working out of a private investigator's office in Brooklyn. And there were several of us working out of this office. And there were some PIs who did organized crime investigations and some that did counter surveillance, bug sweeps and phone sweeps and that sort of thing, right? And I didn't know he was coming, but one day, who comes walking in? But Reverend Al Sharpton. He had an appointment to come in, meet one of the bosses down there. And came in with his security team, and I guess he had his own investigators or intelligence team that he had with him. And, it was coming, these 4 black guys coming into this white Italian neighborhood in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. And so, but when he walked in, he saw me right away. He noticed me right away. He recognized me. And, he didn't come over and tip his hand and say, "Oh, hey, Ed, how are you?" But, he did kind of, discreetly come over to acknowledge my presence, and I believe that, by him seeing me in that room that day, that he realized it was a safe place where he could be the people he could trust. I excused myself from that meeting because I wasn't part of it. Okay. The next time Al Sharpton came up in my life, or the name Al Sharpton, was, I guess it was on 1989. And I had a business that I sold beepers and cell phones out of the mall in Staten Island. And I had a guy who installed my car phones for me. And we were talking one day. Maybe Al Sharpton came on TV or Don King. I forget what it was. And I said, "Oh, yeah, I know Al, Reverend Al. He's a good guy, And they go, no, he isn't." And I said, "Why not? What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, my dad worked on the Michael Jackson tour with Al Sharpton and Don King. And during that tour, Michael Jackson got caught molesting little boys." And he says, and it was all covered up. And they didn't mention, when he told me this story, they didn't mention it was covered up by Don King or that it was covered up by Michael Frances, who was this mafia guy, we'll get into him later, who was also part of that tour. But they said that it was Al Sharpton who came in and covered everything up. That's what they reported to me at the time, in 1989. Now, you have to remember also, too, that in 1989, the accusations against Michael Jackson were not widely known. It did not come out until 1993, the whole story about Geordie Chandler and how he was being molested by Michael Jackson. That came out years later. And as soon as I heard that, I said, whoa, I heard about this 3 years ago. And I even told my friend, I told his dad, too, who worked on the tour, I says, well, if you have this information, let's go to the National Enquirer. We could sell this. And he said, oh, no way, man. Ed, You can't mess with these guys. These guys are dangerous. And one of the guys who worked on that tour with Michael Jackson and with Al Sharpton and Don King was a guy who was really dangerous. And his name is Michael Franzese. Franzese. Some people call him Franchise. Some people call him Franzese. From Staten Island, when we knew this family, we called it Franzese. My sister went to their wedding, either his or his brother, because he has a brother too, Johnny, who was Sonny Jr. Franchise. And then you had Sonny Franchise, who was the big shot, who was the father, who I believe died in prison. You know, it was a family of gangsters back in New York. Oh, boy. So anyway, Michael Franzese was involved in that tour as well. And Michael Franzese is the one that everyone thinks that the reason why Al Sharpton flipped and became an FBI agent is because of that video where they did an undercover video with Al Sharpton where they took pictures of him where he's wearing a cowboy hat and he's negotiating a coke deal. Okay? And this was in relation to Michael Franzese, who was buddies with Al Sharpton. But that wasn't the only deal that Sharpton had with these organized crime characters. He had a bunch of them. He had another deal with Franzese that involved, because Franzese owned a security guard union. And he hooked up with Al Sharpton, and they went down to Atlantic City, and they tried to extort the hotels and the casinos down there so that they could, get money out of that, But there were all kinds of deals. There was a deal with Con Edison where Al Sharpton was going to be in the get a contract set up for minorities, and he was going to get a part of this contract deal. Again through these characters, So what happened is Al Sharpton, the Reverend Al Sharpton, that everybody thinks is this activist, became an undercover asset for the FBI for a good period of time. This wasn't like one or two little cases. Now, the FBI claims that they flipped him, right? Because they let this tape come out in 2008, I believe it was, of Al Sharpton wearing his cowboy hat, negotiating his coke deal. And Brian Gumbel put this tape on TV. So now they want us to think that the reason why he flipped was because he was negotiating this coke deal. There was no coke in the room. There was no money in the room. They couldn't have gotten a case out of this. And even if you could get a case out of that and you want to flip some guy on that, the way that works is Al Sharpton, you're going to do a deal here for 10 kilos of coke. We want you to set up another drug dealer for 20 kilos of coke. And then you're off the hook. We drop your charges. But instead, they groom Al Sharpton to go out, and they even called it this shotgun approach, where he's going to go out and talk to all these different organized crime figures, and they're going to prepare him for all these meetings first. He's going to go meet with this one. He's going to meet with that one. They set him up with a briefcase that has a hidden microphone in it. They put in his apartment a telephone specifically that was an FBI hotline telephone that they could listen in on everything live going on that phone. Okay? So this was the idea that he was an FBI informant because of some drug deal is just preposterous. This was this guy was a huge FBI asset for a very, very, very long time. Most of the stuff, by the way, too, that he was ratting out on were the Genovese crime family. If you remember, we were talking last week, a couple of weeks ago, with the Ganja Godfather about Ebele from the Genovese crime family in New York City. Ebele is one of these guys that was connected up with Sharpton's investigation, stuff like that. Sharpton worked on so many cases that the FBI managed to get eight judges involved in this, by the way. But so many cases that based on his recorded meetings with these mafia guys, that they were then able to get wiretaps on these people and build cases. And another really fascinating part about that is that the Smoking Gun, if you go to the smokinggun.com and you look up the Al Sharpton case, they talk to a lot of these old mafia guys that get wound up with cases over Al Sharpton, and they're all still loving the guy. Oh yeah, he's a great guy, Al Sharpton. We still love him, you know. So I don't understand what the hell is going on here, but it definitely requires more investigation. One of the cases they had him working on was they tried to get him to set up Don King, and they were working on that one for months. Then they sent him to California to work with a prosecutor in California to go after these mafia guys that are involved in the music industry. Then there's a whole story about how there's some poor guy who had a rap production business, right? I forget what it was called. And next thing he knows, they're shaking him down. He's got Al Sharpton trying to collect money from him, okay? And Al Sharpton is sending over these guys big names, man, you know, in organized crime in New York City back in the 80s. One of these guys that they had a case again was Matty the Horse Iannella, who went to prison for years with the garbage contracts and heroin dealing. So, just unbelievable cases he was working on for the FBI. But I think one of the most shocking things that I discovered in that time period is that while all this was going on, while this guy was a full-time FBI informant, okay, this is when the whole Tawana Brawley case was going on. Now, people from New York or the East Coast will remember the Tawana Brawley case, but people, in other countries, maybe other parts of this country, won't quite know what I'm talking about. Okay, so let me give you a little bit on that, because right now, a lot of the stuff about a lot of the reason why Al Sharpton is considered to be discredited these days is because of the Tawana Brawley case. But a lot happened during that Tawana Brawley case that is weird to begin with. And we have to look at this case through the eyes of how we look at other cases, like we look at the Son of Sam case and the Protestant Church and these other things that we look at, because I think there's a lot more to see in the Tawana Brawley case that we saw at the time living through it on the news. Now, who was Tawana Brawley? She was a 15-year-old kid, little girl, living in Wappinger Falls, New York. All right, she was a good student at school. She was a B student in high school, and she was a cheerleader. She was a member of the gospel choir at church. She'd gotten off the bus and was walking home, and she claimed that two men grabbed her. They displayed a badge to her. They put her in a vehicle, and then she was raped and sodomized by 6 white men for 3 days. Then they dropped her off 3 days later in a garbage bag with feces smeared on her body and racial epithets written on her body. Now, one of the reasons why, and Al Sharpton took to her cause, and it was really the end of his credibility in New York City among many people. There was a man named Stephen Pagonis, and he was an assistant district attorney in Dutchess County. His father was a judge, and his uncle is one of the most powerful judges in Dutchess County. Okay, now, he won a lawsuit against Al Sharpton and against two of Al Sharpton's attorneys who were part of this team advising Tawana Brawley. It was a defamation lawsuit. Now, a lot of people think, then that clears him totally. He did nothing wrong because he won the lawsuit. But the fact is, what was really at the gist of that lawsuit were these crazy, outrageous statements that Al Sharpton was making, not just about Pagonis, but against investigators and stuff, saying things like that they had crime scene photos and that they were taking them home and they were masturbating to the photos. claiming that they were all part of this rape and cover. Just they went nuts. Okay, Al Sharpton literally went crazy and went reckless and was just making the most wildest accusations that you can imagine. But why didn't Al Sharpton pick on Stephen Pagonis? Okay? According to Edwin Garcia, who was a close friend of Pagonis, and he was also a police officer, Pagonis admitted to him that he was in that vicinity of the bus stop when Tawana Brawley got off. And he told Edwin Garcia that he had just left a topless bar in that area. Now, when Pagonis was questioned about this, he told the police, and he testified on oath on a grand jury at the defamation trial, that he was home with his fiancée, who he married right before the defamation trial started, so she couldn't testify. She didn't testify on his behalf or against him. She also separated from him soon after the trial. But he had claimed that early in the evening he was home with his fiancée and with his parents. Nobody took the witness stand to support this alibi. Now, why didn't... A lot of people don't realize that... Well, you know what? I'm going to take a break right here, okay? And I'm going to check over my notes here so I can get this good for you. We're going to be right back after these messages. This is the Opera Report, brought to you by audibletrial.com. We're going to play a couple of messages here from our sponsors, and we'll be right back after this.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
And now a word from our sponsors. We are listener-sponsored, and we appreciate your donations. If you like the show, please visit OppermanReport.com and click on the donate button, or you can donate directly from PayPal at OppermanReport@gmail.com. We have Mike Ray at InfinityHomePlans.com. He's the host of Parlay over at CJ Mars Radio, Thursday evenings, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you need custom home designs, stock plans, or 3D work, he's your one-stop shop for home design and drafting needs. Mike Gray at InfinityHomePlans.com. At InfinityHomePlans.com. If you're looking for essential oils, stop by and check out Essentially Tammy on Facebook. She is a young, living essential oils independent distributor. These are 100% therapeutic grade oils. They help support the body's natural functions. Visit our website posted on Essentially Tammy to see the current deals, or email at JockoTammy, JOCATAMI @yahoo.com, or call 352-239-8546. 352-239-8546. Hey, if you need a private investigator, go to my website, emailreviewer.com. We offer asset searches, locates, skip tracing, adoption investigations, online infidelity investigation, and for the delete text messages from a cell phone, or trace an email to online dating websites to catch people cheating. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can call 800-572-9762. 800-572-9762, or emailrevealer.com, my PI website. Pacific West Bamboo. It's your premier source for construction and craft-grade bamboo poles. They're announcing their latest project with eco-hit and sanitation, making bamboo composting bathrooms and porta potties. Their first display will be at the Lucidity Festival in Santa Ynez, California, April 11th to the 13th. Come by and say hi and see what you can do with them. Contact them for any kind of event planning, display building. If you need
about 25 minutes, we're going to have Ted Rubenstein come on here. He was a roommate of Dave Emery, and he also worked with
503-839-8126,
May Brussels, and also with Larry
visit
Flynn.
PacificWestBamboo.com.
If I don't have time to get out all the information on this Sharpton report, that I'll do an additional report on this
Mexican women.
and put it up in the members section.
Rural Mexican craft women's
on the Opperman Report blog,
handcrafted, authentic jewelry.
And get that. But don't forget that Neil Sanders interview that I did yesterday.
Blue Abilene inlay.
That's in the
wonderful
we'll be up in the members
love
section
letters
shortly.
written to their men in the United States.
It was very. So many things came up with Neil Sanders that I wasn't expecting.
But
we
they've
talked
written
about
a new
Ted
book,
Gunnison. We talked about the Franklin cover.
It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider.
Just about everything. He has a great way of presenting his thoughts.
Azukina Part 1.
And I was very, very impressed. I guess that's because he's a
you can find their books and jewelry
maybe just
by clicking
hypnotized
on
me
their banner ad at OppermanReport.com or by Googling New
I really
World
enjoyed it,
Mexican
and I learned
women.
a lot with Neil Sanders.
You can also promote your business or website.
So welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. The show is brought to you by Audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. Get yourself a free audiobook. Now, we had left off, we were talking about Tawana Brawley. And there's so much stuff with that Tawana Brawley case because that's kind of what knocked Al Sharpton off the rails. And if you noticed, the Tawana Brawley case was the first time he ever started calling for the federal government to come in and take over an investigation. Most people are on the impression that Tawana Brawley lied, and that's why they lost this lawsuit. But there's so many things here that went on. First of all, we know she was raped, okay? Because she was taken to a female gynecologist in Orange County, New York, and she diagnosed Tawana Brawley as being raped. Tawana Brawley did cooperate with investigators at first, and she spoke to a female FBI agent. It turned out later on that we found out this female FBI agent was a girlfriend of Pagonis. By the way, the crew that was involved in this whole thing, man, investigating this case and suppressing all this stuff, was Elliot Spitzer, okay, Governor Mario Cuomo, Robert Abrams, and Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, who was at the time the U.S. Attorney General in 1987, you know? So, how did all these accusations come out against Pagonis and all this stuff? What was it? Well, Tawana Brawley had given a description of a guy, and it fit the description of a man named Henry Chris Jr., who was a police officer in Dutchess County. And he was a friend of Pagonis. As a matter of fact, Pagonis was the last person to see this man alive. Could have been within hours. Okay? Now, they had claimed that this guy, Chris, had committed suicide. But later on, it was ruled that it was a homicide. Okay? So there was all kinds of shenanigans with that. But my point is, though, with the whole thing is, there's just so many details you have to look into with the Tawana Brawley case, because it was the downfall of Al Sharpton. He did kind of go off the rails, making all these wild accusations. But there was so much weird suspicion. His girlfriend being the FBI agent who interrogated Tawana Brawley, His friend commits suicide, hours after seeing him. Then we find out maybe it was a murder. So there was a lot of reasons to look into this. This wasn't as outlandish. There was a rape that took place. There's no doubt about that, because she was examined by a doctor. Okay. All kinds of discrepancies in that case, and you should look it up. Mostly, but the problem is, too, is when you look that up, all you're going to really find is stuff about how Tawana lied, and it was a big hoax, and Al Sharpton peddled this hoax, and blah, 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 blah. But the point that I'm trying to make, and why I bring up the whole Tawana Brawley episode, is because that was the first time that Al Sharpton, while he was working for the FBI full-time, he was there full-time undercover, setting up cases for them. He was at the same time calling for the federal government to come in and take over this investigation. And that's something new that started in his career that he's done ever since. And whenever he goes to these towns now, when he goes to Ferguson, when he goes to Staten Island, when he goes to Baltimore, first thing they ask for, bring in the federal government. Let the Department of Justice investigate this case. Because the guy, he works for the feds, man, and that's what he is. Now, there's a whole other element to this because we're getting down to the last 20 minutes, okay? Is about how Al Sharpton, many people consider him to be some kind of a liberal, radical, and always the people who you see object to Al Sharpton when they post these things on Facebook or they talk about him, they're always these right-wing conservatives, okay, who hate Al Sharpton. And I believe a lot of that hatred is based on racism, okay? They see this blackface in here. They don't like his voice. They don't like the fact that he's talking up against cops. But they don't realize, okay, that Al Sharpton, since the 80s at least, okay, has been working for the Republicans. He's been working for the Republican Party, guys. And the Village Voice has done a series of articles about this whole thing. And even his own quotes. Now, Al Sharpton, he's run for the U.S. Senate in New York City back in 88, in 92, 94, 97. He ran for, and he always loses, okay? In 2004, he ran for president of the United States of America, okay? And his entire campaign was run by a man named Roger Stone, who is a Republican dirty tricks guy. He's an operative, dirty tricks guy. And he's the one who was in charge of, down in Miami-Dade County, Florida in 2000, of those crowds in the street where they have those Cubans in those white shirts, the white collared shirts and ties, banging on the door, boom, 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 count the votes, count the votes. He put all that stuff together, okay, that helped Bush steal the 2000 election, okay. He ran Al Sharpton's 2004 presidential campaign, okay? And it's all laid out here step by step by step in these Village Voice articles. And he funded it from his own credit card. See, because what happened is that he, in order to get matching funds from the Democratic Party, you have to have 5,000 in donations from each state, and then the Democratic Party is forced to match those funds, and that's how you get that money. And it was Stone that put all that together for him. He staffed it, he financed it, and he organized it, and he ran it. In the meantime, Al Sharpton was living like King Farouk in $4,000 a night hotels at the Helmsley Carlton, okay? All this wild stuff. And while at that same time, Al Sharpton's girlfriend, who was his executive director of the National Alliance, whatever that thing is called, the NAN, because he changed it, she was campaigning to become the DNC vice chair. So here you have Al Sharpton running for president on the Democratic ticket. It's funded by the Republicans and run by and organized, kept managed by the Republicans. Well, at the time, his girlfriend's trying to become the head of the Democratic National Convention. Now, it's like, what more do you need to see? When I try and tell you that both parties are exactly the same and they're all in cahoots together, this is some really deep stuff, okay? But Al Sharpton himself is quoted as saying, because he had run all these different times, and he said, well, much of the media criticism of me assumes their goals that they oppose them on me. Well, those may not be my goals. So they will say, well, Al Sharpton never won a political office. But that might not be my goal. Okay, so he's telling you right here that he's entering into these campaigns to split the Democratic vote so that the Republicans win, you know? Now, this is not, and people try and argue with me about this, and they say, well, that was, you know, he needed a campaign manager, he was running for president. No, this goes back to 86, okay, when he endorsed conservative Republican Al D'Amato, okay, for Senate. And he got a whole bunch of black ministers to endorse Al D'Amato in Al D'Amato's campaign against Mark Green. Now, you're not going to believe this, okay, because at the time, I owned a nightclub in New York City, and we ran a campaign fundraiser. We had a campaign event for at the club for Mark Green, to raise funds for the Mark Green. And at the time, in my naivete, I never would have dreamed that Al Sharpton was supporting Mark Green's opponent. It just wouldn't, that would have crossed my mind. There was a whole other thing, too, that with the guy who worked for Al Sharpton, was a convicted heroin dealer, and D'Amato gave him a grant to set up a rehab, okay? It was like a $500,000 grant after D'Amato got this big endorsement by Al Sharpton and 8 other black ministers. But Al Sharpton also met with George Pataki, the Republican, George Pataki, when he was running in 94 against Mario Cuomo. Al Sharpton invited Ralph Nader to his headquarters on the eve of the 2000 vote. Okay, again to split the Democrats to split the Democratic vote, so that George Bush would win. Okay, over and over and over and over and over, Al Sharpton has done everything he can to sabotage the Democratic Party, not to promote it in any possible way. There was a whole nother thing, too, where he took Bill Powers, who was the state GOP chair, and he brought him to a black church, and he had him preach at this black church in order to give him some street cred as well. And this kind of stuff went on over and over. But also, did you know that when Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King's widow, when she showed up at the 1988 Republican National Convention in New Orleans, that was arranged by Al Sharpton. Okay, and when she went and she showed up down there, she sat in George Bush's box. Okay, and she was greeted and kissed by Barbara Bush. Okay, so all of this stuff, people have no idea, and it's such a knee-jerk reaction. To look at the surface of Al Sharpton and say he's some kind of radical, black, leftist, street agitator, when in reality, the guy works for the GOP. He's a GOP stooge, bought and paid for by the Republican Party of the United States, goes out there over and over to split the Democratic vote. While at the same time, his girlfriend is running to become chair of the vice chair of the DNC. Just a fascinating, what do you call it, mixture here going on. Just incredible. Also, too, you might want to look into the Village Voice of a series of articles as well about how Al Sharpton sold out Jesse Jackson. Okay? And what all of that goes into is that when all the rumors started floating around about Jesse Jackson having a love child, Al Sharpton was started a whisper campaign to get all that information out there and to kind of make it acceptable for that kind of stuff to be talked about. And he even did some stuff to rub it in Jesse's face. When they both attended an event together, he invited the person who was basically breaking the story to the event, and he sat him next to his own daughters and his own wife and stuff. Just all kinds of incredible stuff that Al Sharpton's done. Now, okay, right, you know what? I wanted to get into this whole thing, too, about the taxes, because people talk about how, oh, and look at this guy. He doesn't even pay his taxes. And some weird thing about how he's involved in this Walmart thing with Jade Helmet, all craziness. And now he's calling for all police departments to be taken over by the federal government. So people's theory is that, well, he doesn't have to pay his taxes, so he's doing this for Obama. Well, obviously, he has no allegiance to Obama, other than, Obama's CIA. Because Sharpton is FBI. There's no doubt about that. You got to go back and look at all these cases he did for the FBI. But now people talk about, well, he doesn't pay his taxes. And the guy doesn't pay his taxes, and he never did. The guy never paid his taxes way back when we were all activists together. And back in those days when he had his the youth network was run out of Brooklyn, that was a pretty disturbing thing, too, that was going on back in those days, because he didn't pay his rent to his landlord either. And his landlord at the time was not some big, rich guy. This was a small office in a small building. And Jack Sharpton and his thugs intimidated this guy, and they went months and months. I don't think they ever paid rent there even once, to tell you the truth. And that was something that people talked about, that it was dirty dealings. But now the man owes over $1 million in taxes. Okay, but beyond that, all the campaign irregularities in his campaign fundraising, which it was galore. There was one incident where he submitted a bill to the campaign that he had spent $150,000 at Kinko's to print up letters. Just crazy stuff, man. Like Al Sharpton never had $150,000 in his pocket to go walk into Kinko's, and then later on he wants to charge his campaign for it. So so it goes so far beyond the fact that he doesn't pay his taxes, because he hasn't paid any of his campaign fines and irregularities that have gone on with all his campaign fundraising. When he was just galore over there, living in these $4,000 a night hotel rooms and hotel suites, and all the shenanigans. And by the way, too, the National Action Network right now does nothing for anyone. They don't have a food program. They don't have an education program. They don't have a health program. They don't have one program to help people that are in trouble, inner city or outer city or any kind of person. Okay, the one thing that they claim that they run is a voter registration hotline, which used to ring at the apartment in Trump Plaza, where Al Sharpton's girlfriend lived, who was the executive director for his organization there. So it really does nothing. And how this guy gets away with this, and the people, how he gets involved with the families of these victims, and they bring them in, because it doesn't seem to help when the federal government comes in, as we saw in Ferguson, because they just came in and they says, well, we can't prosecute anyway, and they get away with it. So there's all of that. Also, too, it was kind of interesting, too, that down in Ferguson, the head of the new Black Panther Party, at the same time was down there stirring up trouble, was also an FBI informant and has a background in history with his being an FBI informant. So when you look at this, you have these events where unarmed people are being killed by local cops, and then who comes in to run the opposition is the FBI, whether it's New Black Panther Party or Al Sharpton coming in with his team to run all this. Because if you look up the smokinggun.com and you look at the number of cases that he set up, not little cases, we were just informing on people where he was prepped. I guess first he had a pitch, who we knew he was going to go out and target. He had to pitch it to the cops, to the FBI first. Then they prepped him on it before he went there, telling him what they wanted him to say. And then when he went there, he recorded the whole thing and then brought it back and then arranged second meetings to go back with these people again. And once the FBI had this stuff, these tapes and these transcripts, they were able to get huge wiretaps and wiretap offs. Vincent the Chin Gigante. They wiretapped his girlfriend's apartment. They wiretapped his social club. They were able to take one of these mafia guys and take his car and put a wiretap in the car and bring the car back. Big stuff. All based on Al Sharpton, because he was a credible witness. He was a credible informant and a credible witness and a credible asset for the FBI. And this was going on while Tawana Brawley was going on. This was going on. Now just think, if the information that came to me is true about how he covered up the thing with the child molestation with Michael Jackson, that went on while he was practically a full-time undercover FBI asset. Now, it would seem to me, knowing this, it's the information's out there. This isn't very little of this comes from me exclusively. Very little. Most of this is coming from the SmokingGun.com, and most of this is coming from the Village Voice. And the Tawana Brawley stuff, that's kind of out there. People know that. But you would think now, knowing this, that how can they get away with telling us, well, he's this racist rabble-rouser and he's trying to stir up trouble down in Ferguson? There's no doubt the guy's working for the government. There can be no doubt at this point, even slightly. And it's no doubt that he's working more for the right-wing Republicans than he is for the Democrats. But he's on MSNBC, right? So he must be a liberal. He must be some kind of Democrat, right? Because he's on MSNBC saying all the right stuff, right? But he's not. You don't think that Rachel Maddow and these people on MSNBC know these stories I'm telling you? Everyone knows it. It's not a secret. If you read some of these Village Voice articles, they go into a dollar amount detail about how all of this was funded, and he never pays his bill anywhere he goes. All his campaign workers, no one got paid. No one ever gets paid. A dime never leaves this man's pocket. You got to wonder how he pulls these deals off, because everyone gets burned at the end. So, but everyone must know these stories because they're all out there. They're every freaking where. I don't know what to tell you. Because it's all freaking here. Coretta Scott King, Al D'Amato. Like, this guy's so deep in the belly of the beast, man, doing their bidding for them. And but yet we're hypnotized and we're tricked into thinking that he's the exact opposite of what he really is. And it's the irony is the people that hate him the most are these racist right-wing bigots, when meanwhile he's them. He's working for them. He's their guy. He's their creation. They bought, he's them. Oh boy. Anyway, that's my Al Sharpton report for you. I might actually do a little longer, more detailed prepared one and put it in the member section. Now, what I'm going to be doing right now, real quick, I'm going to be bringing on, in a few minutes, I'll be calling my next guest, Ted Rubenstein. But anybody listening on Spreaker, what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this show on Spreaker and I'm going to restart it. So I don't have to edit it later. So don't panic. Okay, we're not losing the show. Just sit tight and you'll see another show coming up. It'll be titled Ted Rubenstein. Okay, and then with Awake, Awake, everything's staying the same. I'm going to play an ad over there, and we'll be right back after these messages.